I guess I don't. Oh wait, on 3-4 that was like, yeah, it's like you go like 3-4, and I just do, hey, program number 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
And the people who speak the most here are Peter and Julia.
Okay.
2 angles on Peter.
Nice, nice.
And we get a second on Julia.
Wow. Great.
Yeah, and then I always have number 2, like, alright, I just give you, like, this situation.
Oh yeah, for the
Yeah, for the public comment.
magic.
For the action is.
Cool. Is this like good?
Oh yeah, you can make,
So cool.
you want to make it really artsy for me.
Yeah.
You can get like,
Dude, you're really slow.
sometimes when I'm bored, I get like either like really extreme close-ups,
Oh yeah.
reaction shots,
Look at
or
their eyes.
just on this thing. This is a very avant-garde government video. But yeah.
Definitely. Alright, yeah.
Yeah, that's what that is.
No, I'll definitely let you do that because you guys are map. You have a whole mapped out perfectly.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can switch up in the middle if you want to.
It's up to you. Honestly, I'm I don't know what's gonna happen. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was depending on if you got into this stuff.
Yeah.
Now it's like, but yeah, it's good. I know I'm probably not staying in New York, probably. Once this program ends, like, doing the library, but yeah, but you're gonna be here, because the program goes through, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for a little.
Yeah. How are you liking it so far this week?
Yeah, I do a lot of stuff.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like you do this.
jobs.
Yeah, what are your other jobs?
I work in vacation at
Oh, wow. Okay. Does that make sense?
It's, I think, pretty chill and gentle for kitchen work.
Okay. Yeah,
Like a great
but
boy.
it's high energy environment usually, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's draining. My life works slowly.
Yeah.
But, I don't know, I'm learning a lot about cooking.
That's cool. So what do you do in there?
I'm a line cook. So
Oh, whoa.
I
Yeah.
make a lot of wraps.
Oh, yeah.
Make them and then I put food in them.
Great.
And I roll them up very, very quickly.
Wow.
Make
Yeah.
a toast.
That's intense. Yeah. Line cook. Geez.
Peel a hard boiled egg like so fast.
Man, yeah, so slow cooking.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
in
that's good.
town and I was like, well, I'll
What's your
just
other job?
stay around.
I need to go back to your family right now.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Not tonight.
That's what I
It
want to know
wouldn't
about that.
matter anyways, by the time I got there, I'd have to come back, so.
It's nice, yeah, it's like stuff I took, like, non-Thai features and
Cool.
hanging
Just
out.
hanging out. That's great, yeah. That's awesome.
2 hours of my day.
Sweet, yeah. Yeah, you are really good. Yeah.
At least in the winter. I
It's
think
in the winter,
summer.
yeah. Oh, yeah, in summer, there's so much more things to do at coastal.
There was 1 week where I went to Boston about every day.
Well, hopefully it's warming up. It's gonna be in the 40s this week or whatever. It's like uncomfortable, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's like kind of just like, yeah. Yeah.
No,
I don't know. Yeah. I'm from Florida too, so
oh shit.
yeah.
You and Jordan both, like.
Yeah, Jordan too, yeah. Yeah, we both sailed from there, but it's just such a brutal shock, you know?
Yeah.
Especially not having grown up with winter really.
Yeah. But at least it's like,
Yeah. They're fine, honestly. Don't bother them, they don't bother you. But they are like everywhere. I see them on the road, you know?
that's crazy.
Yeah, they're just out there.
That's like a big scary animal.
It is, so you just gotta be used to it, like, keep to themselves.
Hi.
How are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are evil.
Cheer up, so I'm not sitting in a hole.
I know.
Yeah.
We don't have those in the United States.
Salt water trucks.
They ask you.
Yeah, but they're more common.
Yeah.
You know, that's where I kind of defaulted to, and I thought, I wonder if something wrong.
Hey there. Been here for like hours? Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Bill,
Hi, welcome back.
sorry, we missed you.
Yeah, I missed you guys too.
Right on.
I missed you guys too.
Look at somebody who knows like they've been here before, so
Yeah, it
maybe over here.
was a fun week.
Just had rain one day.
It rained one afternoon, it saved us all. Really, what a difference.
That's what when I was talking to Larry and Pete Anderson, one day, they called me joking around with the captain's pick and all stuff. And I said, any suggestions? I said, one suggestion is just one day, do 27.
Well, we had that opportunity, and it was a big difference.
To me, it's an issue of sleep and just fatigue. You don't have to, and that day, you don't have to tee off at 7:30 in the morning. And you could get back to the house, at a civilized time. Yeah, anyway.
It worked out, that's exactly how it worked. And Natty got his nap, and, so, I don't know if we learned from that or not, to tell you the truth. But there was a lot of talk about that. And, yeah, but it was more relaxed this year for some reason. People were not, just more relaxed and a little laid back. And the format lent itself to that. Half the time you didn't know what you were playing for, where you were. I mean, you know, you're gonna match cards afterwards, right?
Yeah.
How much attention is there in that, right? Make this putt or don't make this putt doesn't mean, who knows? Who knows what it means, right? Your team almost came back. You were, the Dogs were way down.
I knew they were losing,
And they almost came back. We were actually 1 point apart going into the afternoon.
Oh, then that's good.
Didn't know it. Did you hear the story about Bruce's, is it Mashie?
I haven't heard any stories at all.
So, we were, who was it? Brett and I against Bruce and John, I think. And we were playing against best ball. So that match, you knew it was going. So we get up to the 16th. Bruce's team was behind by 2. I don't know if you remember that, but it was a really long one uphill. But all those traps, you never get rid of those traps. So you purposely put it in a trap. I accidentally put it in a trap. I'm not sure. It's a shot. No, you go. I'm going to go. You go. No, I should have smelled the rat. Well, you didn't smash it. Nobody else knew about it, remembered or anything. So he used his mashie to win that hole.
How was fishing?
I did not go.
The fishing was great.
He's
Few
hearing stories.
mackerel. Anyway, well, that was the kind of fun. He had me, I mean, he just snookered me big time. He just snookered me big time. I deserved it. So we had good time. Good.
How did your, how was the meeting? I was thinking I should just stay closer.
Oh,
Then
we should
I
talk.
would ask.
You and I need to talk.
Yeah.
Way off. Okay, way off one. We took no action. Talk about a meeting next week, maybe. Took no action.
Probably, there's not enough information, it's tricky. Well, it's also, we need to, it's just like government do.
Yes, I agree with that.
Because that's, I think, the thing that we risk, it's like these churches.
She acknowledges it's a tie.
Hey, I brought my glasses.
Good, how are you?
Good, Darren Morrissey.
Yeah, there, yeah.
Is there a super secret Wi-Fi password that I can use?
Oh, it's just, you just go to town hall,
Is it not no password?
no password.
A lot of people.
No super secret password.
It should have been taxable as a golf course.
As a private country club. So, as a
There you go.
You can't get your back.
Easy.
Because
I know,
then you
we
can
try,
say
we
it's
try not to
now-
be
now
too
it's- now
super
it's-
stealthy.
But then it's like, okay, so, you know, and what is our crazy tax? Our crazy regressive tax, you know, taxing highest and best use, it's like, it's just not a good way to do it because then you want to, you want to develop it. It's like Kendall. Kendall is spent all that money on Jamestown. And then we got a 20-year lease because they didn't want to pay taxes. Because the highest and best use of that would be a mega mansion, $10 million home.
Yep.
And
So,
so it'll be interesting. Well, we'll probably put it in.
Nancy's still.
Nancy
Put
is,
it in current use.
Nancy is on her way back.
they don't want to take it out.
She was concerned she would
Well,
not make
at
this
some
meeting
point,
because she was cutting it.
I mean, it's,
And they
no,
have
no,
some-
no,
they
but
have
it's
some
some
Took
of
her
it.
name
Well,
tag
Oak Hill
already.
stuff, Oak Hill is a.
As soon as she
That
started.
was my
And if
recollection.
we
She'll
about
be
that,
Wednesday.
Yes, she, yes,
Not today.
not today, yep.
Fort Sayre has.
She
leases
told
on
us
it,
at
you
the
know,
last
all of
meeting that
these
she was,
not-for-profit organizations use all of that.
She was cutting it
So
close.
how do we deal with that? And I think that goes to the community. It's
Yeah.
like, how do we want to do that? And you know, like, we have exemptions for vets, we have exemptions for
Especially right
solar,
now.
you know, I mean, we have set tax parameters because we're not taxing our solar arrays, you know, we're not, we give vets a certain exemption from property taxes and older people, and, you know, all of which, you know, I'm a flaming socialist, so I'm like, yeah,
Of course.
I want, and that's another thing about the email that you sent me, it's like, are you freaking kidding me? Of course we want that exempt. They may not wanna, the neighbors may not wanna trim it now, but 10 years from now, they may be gone. And our children, it's like the best trail in the entire town. You know, I've hiked it up there.
From Rosebrook,
Yeah,
from Rosebrook.
no, I mean.
Yeah, I
me,
just
that's
turned
like-
it down.
Okay,
Yes, I was thinking the very same thing, which is
Oh, I can
odd
imagine.
because it only
I-
is
But I mean,
67 degrees on.
But what you presented, you know, in terms of the neighbors, you know, encroaching on their cabin, it's like, yeah, it's nice to have private property, isn't it?
But that one's easy. We'll just commit to no trails.
Yeah.
That's an easy.
Oh, no, that's an
That's an
easy.
easy.
But, I mean, commit in the sense of, as of right now. But I don't wanna put something that we're gonna regret, like, right now, Conservation Commission, cause they didn't like bikes 30 years ago, don't allow bikes in Minkbrook Preserve, with the Minkbrook, you know, river thing. That's an incredible route, an alternative route to get people to the hospital and to get them into town. But now we can't, because, you know, Ed Chamberlain didn't like bikes 30 years ago. And that's a problem for me. I think we need, it's kind of like having conservation easements on land that prohibit solar arrays. I mean, solar arrays aren't gonna be the end all forever, but maybe for the next 50 years they are. But by saying no to them, we're limiting ourselves to how the land can be used, like the land down at the river. You know, by the organic farm, nothing can happen down there.
I know.
And it's like,
It's sad.
premium south-facing land. So I never thought I would feel this way, because I've always been a greenie and a tree hugger, but we can't like put these crazy restrictions on things
In perpetuity.
in perpetuity because of our children and our grandchildren. Well, I may never have any of those grandchildren, but that's okay. I don't, there's others.
Apples, would you rather we put our masks on?
I don't care. No, I'm gonna wear mine. You can do whatever you want.
I brought mine.
Yeah, we're all on this
Maybe I'll
sort of-
maybe I'll wear mine and just take it off when I
Well, that's what I was thinking when you speak. Yeah,
We do not have a mask ordinance, is that correct?
we do not, no, it's just encouraged but not required.
Welcomed. I like that.
Welcome.
Masks are welcome.
Masks are welcome.
We're still required.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's time. How are we on?
Okay.
We're on. Oh, good. We could have been here for a while with the left hand and the right hand getting
It's a
together.
moment of peace.
Good evening. Welcome to the Town of Hanover Selectboard meeting of March 21st, 2022. We're here tonight to have some fun and do good work for the town. As always, the first order of business is public comment. Hearing none, I adjourn a public hearing to consider amendments to the FY 22-23 proposed budget.
Yes, so we have distributed to the board this evening, or we distributed to the board on Friday, I'm sorry, an outline of a proposed approach to amending the budget to offset the errors that were discovered because of some problems with the linked spreadsheets that we were using. And so the memo, which is dated March 16th, walks you through the changes and makes some suggestions on options for the board to consider. Would it be helpful, Peter, if I just sort of read these bullet points on the memo that went out to the
I
board?
think we should just look at the options.
Okay, all right. So, we have a revenue shortfall based on the spreadsheet calculation error of $434,483. with an option to raise the municipal general fund tax levy from 2.8% increase, which is where we were when the board adopted the budget on March 2nd, to a new levy of $11,149,859, which would be a 3.5% increase. That 1%, a little bit less than 1%, it's 0.6%, 0.7% increase, would generate an additional $75,410 in revenue.
I should interrupt the importance of the 3.5% is that was at the lower end
Of the
tax
range.
rate target that we asked the management to come back with. We asked them to come back with a budget in the 3.5 to 3.9 range.
Correct. If you went with a 3.5% tax rate increase, which generates an additional $75,410, it leaves a remaining deficit of $359,073, with a recommendation to budget use of undesignated fund balance to offset that additional expense and arrive at a 3.5% tax rate increase, which would reduce the general fund undesignated fund balance remaining after utilizing the fund balance to 15.88%. Remembering that our target is 10 to 15% for the undesignated fund balance for the general fund, for any fund for that matter. Another alternative approach, which is something the staff suggested, because we typically see savings incurred in our budget during an actual expenditure year, often is not because of vacant positions that occurred during the year and some period elapses between when the vacancy occurs and when we fill that position. And because there's some additional revenue potential looming in the future, depending upon how all these state budgets and federal budgets play out. You could simply identify that $359,073 as a savings to be incurred during the fiscal year. So it's essentially an amount of money we would need to underexpend the general fund by in order to end the year in balance. Or the board can do some variation of the three. You could go to a 3.9% tax rate increase, for example, which would generate roughly another $45,000 in revenue, roughly. Use some undesignated fund balance and set aside the rest as an amount to be, a savings to be incurred during the budget year. So any one of those three or a combination of three were the recommendations we suggested to the board.
Really, just for my own clarification, let's assume the 3.5, just as an assumption. Whether we use undesignated fund balance or whether we use the savings to be incurred approach, mathematically gets you to the same place at the end of the year.
It does, correct.
I think, for my personal preference, the cosmetics of the savings to be incurred is more, is better, because we're actually saying we intend to save this money over the year, and we will find a way to do that, as compared to, let's see if we save it, and if we do, we won't need to use the undesignated fund balance.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, but mathematically, I think you get to the same place at the end of the year.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Just looking at, I agree with you what you just said there, Peter, but it also seems in my mind to be a lot of attractiveness to leaving the tax levy at 2.8% and potentially fiddling around as was suggested with, so basically that means we need to come up with 75,000 somewhere else. And you could use a lot of that, so that brings you back up to 434. You could use a lot of the savings to be incurred during the fiscal year to touch that and use a little bit of the undesignated fund balance to get you back to zero.
The difference is that if let's assume mine Plan A. In Plan A, you're still going to be in the hole going into next year's budget, because you didn't tax people to the tune of X dollars. And if you go down to 2.8, X just becomes larger. In other words, the hole you're digging at 2.8 is deeper than the hole we're digging at 3.5.
Sure. I agree with that.
Okay.
I'm just saying,
I prefer to dig a deeper hole. I don't mean-
Yeah.
I don't mean to be sarcastic. I'm just saying the difference is that we're already gonna be in a hole. Because we will have stuff in our budget that will be recurring next year that we haven't taxed for. So we're gonna have to fess up to that next year. Now, who knows what's coming down the pike the next 9 months in terms of additional revenues and state, who knows? But potentially, we are putting ourselves in the hole by not taxing it 4.5% or something like that. And I'm not suggesting we go there, but to go, and the 3.5 was our original,
right?
the downside of our original target, that there is some logic to staying with that. Now, we got to 2.8, but we got to 2.8 by having better
Sure.
news than we deserve.
Sure.
That's,
Sure. Fair enough.
that's only where I'm not
No,
saying you
that's
should.
fair enough.
That's where my
I think
head's
it's a
at
little bit
anyway.
of philosophical, it's a huge philosophical difference, but I agree with you. I don't think there's any, I mean, the money needs to be covered regardless.
I'm sure there. Go ahead, Bill? Bill?
Yeah. I'm looking at Tina on this one. There's been numerous, since this document went out on Friday, there's been numerous correspondence back and forth on adjustments. The numbers we're talking about, is this the right number? I thought we were off on it a little bit, so maybe could you, I suggest Tina come to the microphone and
Tina, give us some
give
new
us the
news.
correct number, and then we could talk philosophically on the approach.
Actually, if I can defer to Kari, the change sheet,
Well,
her
what-
and I have been working together, so I guess we can both go. Okay.
Good idea.
It's been a tag team for the week and a
Thank you.
half, so why not continue?
And a lot of late night tag teaming, I might add. Midnight emails, so I don't know who has a sleeping problem, but somebody clearly is
Kari emails me late at night, I email her early in the morning.
burning the midnight oil and the early morning oil.
So with working all of the numbers, and we found a couple of errors in calculations, made a couple of little adjustments. Kari found one of the capital reserves for public works was off about exactly $4,054. So, in order to,
I mean, these two are by 145. So first of all, in my efforts to, that I think Julia is looking at, somehow I have deviated from Tina's numbers by $141 out of, 18 million. So I think we're pretty close here. But we both agreed in both of our numbers that basically the gap right now between revenues and expenditures is $363,000. So the question is, how do you want to fill that gap? I have to say, from the Finance Committee's perspective, when we were sort of quantifying that would be a functional piece. And I would say we've continued to look at the blended tax rate, not the general tax rate increases, because, as far as we're concerned, if you take money out of this pocket, which is your fire fund pocket, or this pocket, which is your general fund, it doesn't matter which pocket your money's coming out of. So we've been looking at the blended tax rate. And, the amount of expenditures that we're looking at here, that would be the equivalent of a 5.6% increase in the blended tax rate, which I think we all agree that functional rate would not fly. So the question that Julia has teed up for you is the right one, which is how do you want to fill this gap? And there's three ways. I can say that the Finance Committee, when we talked about it, their support from different corners of the committee for all three that Julia suggested. I would just also say that, a combination of those levers may be your best option, because what you're really doing is balancing the short-term benefits of a lower tax rate now versus mid-term benefits of building a more resilient tax rate for future increases. And we do know that there's going to be a lot of pressures on the tax rate in terms of the CIP, in terms of the hole that we're already in from using $300,000 of one-time monies for the current fiscal year. And I'm sorry, that's maybe not quite everything you were expecting from
Okay,
Tina and
so,
me,
so,
but I just wanted to get that out on the.
so relative to our memo of March 16th,
Yes.
is the 3.5 the blended tax rate? Question mark, Tina, is the 3.5 that you've proposed, is that the blended tax rate?
That's just the general fund.
That's general fund, right?
Do you know what the blended would be?
It would be the 3.2%.
When you factor in the fire funds.
When you
Yes.
factor, because they have a very small increase this
Right.
year. So
So,
they're
If
bringing
we
it
went to
back.
a 3.5 blended, how much additional cash would that give us? Not a lot, but something.
That would be about 45,000.
Right.
And if you went up.
Another 45,000 in
Yeah,
cash.
and if you.
Which was, again, our original budget request was
3.9 to
Was-
3.5.
the 3.5 to 3.9
Right.
Correct.
blended rate. So if we went to a 3.5 blended rate, it would give us not 75,000, but a bit more than that.
Yes, it's 75 plus 45.
So 120 grand.
Thank you.
And if you went up to the 3.9% in the blended, it would give you another 100,000. So you have the 75
Yep.
and 100,
Okay.
or 175.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to amend my suggestions, that we go to a 3.5
Blended.
blended rate,
Sure,
and then deal with the rest as savings to be incurred.
sure.
That would be my suggestion, that's all.
And if we don't incur those savings, can we access the undesignated fund?
Automatically.
That's where we get our money from if we go over budget.
Well,
Quite.
no, because the only time we would access the undesignated fund balance, Joanna, is at tax rate setting with DRA. And we would not do anything to access undesignated fund balance beyond what we've targeted in the proposed budget without the select board's authorization. So my sense is that between savings we will incur in the upcoming fiscal year, particularly on the salary line items through position vacancies, and the prospect of some additional offsetting revenue that may arrive at our doorstep, either through some form of secondary recovery fund related to oil price hikes, or just because we were conservative in our revenue estimates, we need to make up the difference in making savings decisions on our operating side. The only way I'm comfortable allocating any undesignated fund balance is if the board actually appropriates the use of undesignated fund balance as part of your budget motion tonight. Of course, this
That's,
is,
I mean, that's a lot of savings. I mean, that's 320 grand in savings. I mean, that's a lot of vacant positions, that's a lot of money coming from the budget. I mean, could we split the difference?
Well, I did think of one other option in terms of allowed usage of undesignated fund balance. You know, we went through the 5, the logo, the compensation study, et cetera. But next year will be our last year for the bond payment on the community center. So that $80,000 becomes a one-time more. So you could use an additional $80,000 of undesignated fund balance
to make that last bond
to
payment.
make
That's a
that
good
last
option.
bond payment without going against the policy, and then easing off a bit on
The
Yeah.
savings.
how much vacancy rate you need to achieve. So that's a bit of a compromise, and again, touching on multiple levers that you have available to you.
What do you think of that, Julia?
Well, I'm thinking about this both in terms of the overall health of the undesignated fund balance, but also not loading up my successor with a really massive problem to solve, first crack at the bat. So, my preference, from where I sit, it's always easier if we appropriate the amount that we need, that we're short, from undesignated fund balance, so we can use it if we need it. I don't think we're going to need to use it. But if it's appropriated, we at least have the ability to have the conversation with the finance committee and the select board come next spring, depending upon what the operating budget constraints look like. We've got a number of promising opportunities looming, but I'm also concerned about what Governor Sununu is going to do to the gas tax, which pays for our paving budget, a portion of our paving budget, and what he may do to the rooms and meals tax, which could translate to reduced revenues from what we budgeted. So we've just got so many uncertainties in this upcoming year. I would argue it's a highly unusual year coming up because of the uncertainties. So you, oh, sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Let me just clarify a couple of points. So if we start with the original larger number to take out of the undesignated fund balance and put it in, we still are above 15%, which is our high of our target, right?
Correct.
We know, based on what we know at the moment, is that for the end of this fiscal year, June 30, we will have some money left over from the budget, which then rolls in to the general undesignated fund balance, which is going to make it even higher than 15 point something.
Right.
So if we know that, and if we do a combination, you know, take some money that's, as Julia said, from the undesignated fund balance for the vote at town meeting, with the very, I don't know, it's going to be an exceptional year if we're going to have to dip into it based on everything else we know historically and what we know today. So, I mean, it could happen, but I can't come up with that disaster, quite frankly, unless it's, you know, the basic hurricane that washes out many, many roads, et cetera, et cetera. So I think some combination and maybe a shift towards a little more of acknowledging that we do have salary savings every year, not just this past year or next year. You could take something out of that too, just as a designated line and try it for a few years. But I would agree with the, you know, the 3.5 blended rate, and with some other fine tuning.
Let's start there. Do we have an agreement on the 3.5?
Yeah, the blended,
Yes.
blended.
Yes, blended rate of
3.5
3.5%.
blended. So we've got that. Now we have to just decide how to fund the shortfall. And I don't disagree with anything that's being said. I was originally motivated by the cosmetics, because I think in the long run, you end up in the same place whether you, how you get there.
We have a very smart constituency. That, I mean, the cosmetics, I mean,
Well, it's basically saying, well, I don't know how many people other than the finance committee and us really understand how much is coming out of undesignated fund balance or when it gets used or how it gets used. But so that's, if there's no cosmetics, then you take the bills, you take the safe road, you have to get it appropriated as undesignated fund balance, and then try our best, as we always do, not to use it.
If we
So I'm
go,
happy with that.
if we go to a 3.5% blended, what's our general fund deficit, guys? I had originally the 359,073,
so it would be,
but then we've got the additional 4,054, right? So that's a,
Which brings it to 363,
Okay.
127 we have to use,
okay,
which still brings us in a balance in the undesignated of 15.86%
okay, remaining,
remaining.
okay.
and what happens if we
With
do,
more money adding in on June 30.
Right, well, we always have savings at the end of the year that we scrape into undesignated fund balance. That's what happens when we don't expend those monies, so.
But the 363 only assumes 75,000 of additional revenue.
That's
But it's
correct.
not gonna be 75, it's gonna be 75 plus 45,
which is 120.
120.
So
So the 363
Goes down by
becomes-
45,000?
comes down by
Okay.
45.
So it's
Okay.
320.
Okay.
And if, so, but what we're saying is that 320 would be used as general fund supplement. You know, would help us pay our general fund. But what Kari is saying is, we have a one-time expense of 80,000 for the last payment of the bond. So if we take that out.
That would take
so
us
that-
to 238,
And so then,
127.
what if we say 238 in undesignated funds are earmarked to deal
No,
with?
because you've already put, you've taken 80, you're using 80 from under, it's not being taken out now. So it's still gonna add up to the 320.
Yeah, but what we're,
Still gonna add up to 320,
okay.
right?
But at
Eighty
least
of
it's
that, you can-
legitimate within our policy.
You
'Cause
can, you're right, you can argue the 80 is consistent with policy out of the 320 we need.
Right.
I agree, that's it.
And so that means we're, as Kari has said, we're putting that to 240K is like, we're pushing that into the future in terms of expenses. But what we are hoping is that we have that savings in terms of salaries and other savings that we normally get. And we may go in only needing, do you have any idea what we're gonna come out in June 30th? It's too early to say.
No, it's too early. And part of what we're dealing with right now are fuel price impacts, so it's, the diesel fuel prices are,
Yeah,
320 is easily divisible by 2, which is a nice thing.
yeah, that's nice.
So one could propose that we do half through saving, applied savings and half through a designated fund balance.
well, basically,
2 is a number, that's
So-
a pretty
so
lame
Peter, if
thing.
you-
That's a cosmetic thing, Peter.
Okay.
I
You
just
want-
wanna make
give-
sure-
Give me a proposal. You want to do it all from undesignated fund balance? What's the proposal? That's the safest thing to
that
do.
would be my preference,
That's the safest
because
thing to do.
we would still come back to talk with the board before we access those monies, because we're very mindful of the one-time expenditure rule for use of undesignated fund balance. But that at least protects the bottom line.
Okay, let's keep it simple then. Let's take the 3.5 and whatever the number turns out to be when you do all the pluses and minuses, take it out of undesignated fund balance to the tune of around 320,000.
Okay, so you are voting on taking the 80,000 for the
Just,
last one?
80,000's lumped in, so what we're
80,000
saying,
out of the
320, whatever the net is, Tina, and I think it's 318,127 is roughly the net, but we'll determine exactly what the impact of the new blended rate of 3.5% is, as opposed to 3.2%.
Then you need
How much?
You need the 3.5.
Yep.
You need the 80,000 to be, specifically the 80,000 to be
Earmarked
paid
for the community center bond.
Fund balance, and then the balance to be taken out of undesignated fund balance to come into balance. How's that for?
I mean, I don't know if any of the other finance committee members who are here tonight have any thoughts, but I feel that you all understand what I am. So thank you for.
You may understand better than we do, Kari, but
Thank you, Kari, for all the help.
Thank you.
And Tina for all your persistence as well.
we also need to talk about the parking fund.
Yes, you did,
Okay,
but
so-
I didn't know if
Kari,
anybody else has.
did
comments
Carrie
on-
call?
So I'm going to go back, the minutes that we have from our last meeting were not specific enough in terms of what we voted on. So I want to make sure that you are specific enough so you can pull together that motion that we just passed. All right,
Okay.
let's pass it, we haven't passed it yet.
Well, were there any other comments from the crowd?
Input from the crowd. Finance Committee, how are you doing?
Kerry Callahan, Vice Chair of Finance Committee. Just a thought to prefer, I think.
Carrie,
Yes.
hold the mic.
Yes. okay.
Yeah.
It strikes me that the source of the savings is kind of an endemic problem, which is filling positions.
I'm
I'd say
sorry.
the source of the savings is an endemic problem, which is
Filling
the
positions.
inability to fill positions. But could you set yourself an objective to save $100,000 through automation of some job, or, you've got unfilled positions, so you're not actually taking anyone out of a position, potentially you can reshuffle. It's not like anyone loses their job. But if there's a way to do something more efficiently across, I don't know what department, and I don't have a great idea to put forward, but is there a cost savings you can put forward to come up with a year from now that's out there as an objective? We're doing something more smartly and therefore not having to fill all those positions.
Our biggest challenge, Carrie, right now, and has been for the last year plus, is police officers, grounds maintenance personnel, and light and heavy equipment operators. all are positions that are tough to replace through automation. And it's tough to replace them simply by purchasing, for example, a better piece of software, right, to sort of make the administrative burden easier. So I don't know, I don't know how realistic that recommendation is. If we were an organization of tech workers or of telephonists, you know, customer service online, it might be easier, but until they come up with automated trucks, automated grounds positions, and automated police officers, it's still a very people-intensive business.
Kari, I would also hope, being the optimist that I am, that we do that anyway. We're always looking for ways to be more efficient, and we've seen departments change and restructure, and every time there's a new position where a senior person leaves, we're always looking at the whole thing, trying to figure out how we can do it faster and better. So I would hope we do that anyway, just as a part of our normal life. So,
And we will have a different leader.
and we'll have some new eyes in this whole thing a year from now, for sure. Okay, so, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Others want to comment on that first vote? So there's a second vote to be had.
This is just the parking fund challenge, where we've got a mismatch between the amount of funding that's available in undesignated fund balance in the parking fund and the number of capital projects we want to undertake. So in this case, the board has a couple of options. One is to defer the 2022-2023 contribution to the parking fund capital reserve, which is $174,955, which would then enable us to reprogram that money not being contributed to the reserve to stay on track with the two of the projects, two of the more expensive projects we wanted to do for the parking facility and for parking in general. $50,000 to add EV charging stations, not necessarily in the parking garage. One option would be in Lot 1 behind Town Hall. And the second is $124,500 to finish converting all of the lights in the parking facility to LED enhanced
One
fixtures.
question I had is, the deficiency is a result of the operating budget,
Correct.
but the solutions involve capital reserve funds. I don't understand how they offset each other.
No, so the solution, Peter, is rather than taking that money, the $174,955, which was an operating budget appropriation into the capital reserve fund, instead repurpose that money to spend directly on the two of the capital projects that have been called up for in the budget.
Okay.
The alternative is simply not to implement those two projects next year and zero those two out and retain the contribution to the parking fund capital reserve.
Okay. I guess my preference, if I want to go first, my preference would be, we don't have the money, we shouldn't spend it.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't do the projects.
Okay.
And,
Yeah, it's unfortunate because
they're important projects, but they'll be here next year.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, in terms of postponing a year of going to higher energy efficient lighting, I mean, how much money are we losing? Like, the lighting conversion, there's savings to be had in a year immediately, right? But it's not gonna be
Yeah,
a
I
fifth
don't,
of that, or do we know?
I don't know that number off the top of my head,
Aren't most of
Joanna.
those lights LEDs anyway?
We converted most of the garage to LED fixtures, but the two lowest levels are darker than we would like.
They are.
So this is
Scary.
replacing the last of the non-LED fixtures with LEDs and enhancing the quality of the lighting down there. So it's a combo of replacement and increase the number of fixtures.
Okay.
I'm just going to the parking fund.
So it doesn't sound like there's a lot of energy savings
No,
to be
it
had.
doesn't sound, that's fine, don't worry about it.
I mean,
Because we're actually adding, so.
And it
It'll
was,
be, there'll be
when-
some savings, but it'll be minor.
when we did the first part of the LED conversion, Joanna, we saved a lot of money. The payback was very short. There's less bang for the buck with this second phase, but it results in much higher quality, more beneficial or more prevalent lighting in the lower 2 levels of the garage.
Julia, could you just, what were those charging stations you had in the budget?
So the hope was to do a series of, I believe it's 4 charging stations. We currently have 2 in the parking garage, but they're not well utilized,
It's hard
Athos.
to get to.
We're looking at relocating those closer to the top of the garage, but also to potentially put 4 in the municipal parking lot behind Town Hall. When we repaved that parking lot last year, we put in conduit under
Great.
the surface so that we
Great.
could electrify the spaces that are now reserved for Town Hall use. The 4 farthest away from the back of the building could potentially be converted to chargers. And so Pete Kolbacki wanted to get us a start on this. However, I do think if pieces of the Build Back Better legislation actually come to pass, we may be able to secure grant funding for EV chargers. So that's a project we might be able to resurrect by applying for grant funds, if we choose not to fund it through the parking fund.
Yeah, and so before you do that, we'll take that up here in terms of EV chargers, because I've thought about the last time we met and we were
Yep.
talking about slow charging chargers or medium charging chargers or high-speed chargers, and the whole idea that we're even considering slow charging chargers or even mid-range chargers is crazy.
Well,
It should be fast.
There's a whole committee in Hanover, Lebanon, and Hartford that are working on this in consultation with the staff at Clean Energy New Hampshire. There is some rationale behind the types of chargers you want to put where, but I'm not close to those discussions, Joanna, so all I can tell you is Pete got that message when we talked at the Public Works budget
good.
hearing, so
It's,
he
you know,
heard it.
Great.
Okay, do I hear consensus about not spending the money?
Yes, I think we
So
defer.
defer these 2 projects.
Okay, all those in favor of deferring those 2 projects?
Aye.
So essentially, what you are doing is reducing the operating budget for the parking fund, amending it to reduce the expenditure appropriation by $174,500.
You done?
Got a hand raised.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Hartman. I'm actually the school board representative on the Hanover Finance Committee, but I do actually just want to take this opportunity to publicly thank Kari Asmus for her work here. Honestly, this budget gap situation was really started with an honest question from me. Because I found a $25,000 potential error between what the town was sending to the school, and honestly, Kari took that and ran with it, and I just want to, I feel partially responsible for her lack of sleep, and I just really want to appreciate, because, you know, volunteers on the Hanover Finance Committee, and really appreciate the work there, so that's
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done, Carl. Okay, I am going to declare the public hearing.
So,
What about the
Peter,
fire
are you,
department
Is there
water
more?
on the backside?
Oops, backside.
Not really.
Not really?
No, those,
Nothing.
they're fine.
All done.
We're done
Yep.
with
We're
you.
done.
Okay.
You
So,
done?
for the record, are we clear? Can maybe ask Tina to repeat what we just voted on, to make sure that in the record we're in agreement here?
We talking about the general fund now,
Yeah,
Bill?
just the numbers, because that was last time we,
So what the motion is going, what you guys have voted on?
Yep.
3.5% blended tax rate. Potential of using the $80,000 for the last bond payment, approximately $318,127 in undesignated fund balance, but we'll know a cleaner number when we run all the numbers. So
Yep.
the balance of what we need will
Right.
come from undesignated fund balance.
Right.
And then on the parking one, we are still committing to put the $174,955 into capital reserves and just not do the EV charging stations or the parking facility lighting conversion.
So reducing the appropriation in the parking fund on the expenditure side by $174,500.
okay, thank you.
that,
Wait a minute, I just have a question. So we're going to stick 174,000 into the capital reserve budget,
Correct.
and we're not going to we're not gonna spend it. So why not just spend it? Instead of putting it into a reserve fund, so we spend it later and we'll get less value for it because inflation's going through the roof. What, am I missing something?
The membrane, I forgot about the membrane.
So we're looking at the capital improvement program, Joanna, for the parking fund for the upcoming years, not next fiscal year, but the year after that. And we have ongoing planned expenditures in the parking fund.
Okay.
And the contribution we're making is linked to those projects. So
Okay, so these other things are just slush fund things.
these other things are projects we're gonna have to figure out how to do in the future from the operating budget rather
Okay.
than from the capital reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And the odds are pretty high based on what's being discussed on the
At the
federal
federal
level.
level, yeah,
that
that
we
we
could
might
get a
be able
grant.
to, yeah, right.
Correct.
I got it,
Yep.
I got it.
Charging
I
station.
just I forgot about
Understood.
that
Yep.
CIP thing.
Yep,
And
it's,
the parking garage membrane, we changed when? We just changed it, so we, 5 more years?
yeah, Pete and we're working with Desmond, our consultants, to determine the final membrane plan for the garage. So that number is subject to change because we're letting the experts opine on this for us. But for now, it's in the CIP starting for next year, a year from now.
okay, so I am going to close
Budget.
the budget hearing. Thank you again, well done.
Thank you.
And I'm gonna open a hearing to consider seeking town meeting authorization to adopt RSA 4466.30-A, requiring the leashing of all dogs running at large with conditions.
So I shared with the board that in consultation with the town attorney and in re-reviewing the statute, the only way that towns, not cities can do all sorts of things that towns can't do under the statutes, including deem the leashing of dogs to be something that's subject to local ordinance, but towns need town meeting authorization to enforce a leashing requirement for dogs. And the procedure is to seek town meeting authorization to adopt RSA 466:30-A. It has to be acted on during the business meeting, and it must include the use of a paper ballot for the vote. It requires a special ballot. So it's not voted on during the day on the official ballot. It's voted on at town meeting via hand-distributed, marked, and counted ballots. But I do want to point out that when leashing is required, there are certain things you cannot require. And that is dogs which are being used for hunting, supervised competition, exhibition, or training. For such activities, if they are accompanied by the owner or custodian, or a dog which is guarding, working, or herding livestock, meaning that the owner or custodian must be able to see or hear the dog, or have reasonable knowledge of where the dog is hunting or herding, or where training is being conducted, or where trials are being held. So we can't unanimously require the leashing of dogs, but we can essentially require that dogs be leashed for the most general types of recreational activity that owners in Hanover engage their dogs with. So.
And would this be the exact language that would go into the?
No, so Peter, all the warrant article is very simple. We will want to let town meeting know, and I would be sure to include in the background information the limitations to a leashing requirement authorized by town meeting. So if somebody's got a hunting dog or a field dog or a herding dog and they say, I'm sorry, that's a hunting dog, herding dog, or field dog, we can't require they be leashed.
But they have to be hunting, herding.
Or-
I mean, there's not a lot of
They
herding
gotta
going
be
on.
in the act, right?
Yeah,
So I
sheep
can
and,
imagine
hunting.
some creative
Yeah,
attempts to
I'm
claim
sure there
that
will be.
one's golden retriever is a hunting dog, but be that as it may, if town meeting adopts, simply worded, shall we adopt the provisions of RSA 466:30 requiring the leashing of all dogs running at large with conditions, because conditions are what I just highlighted for you, that's all that you put on the warrant. And then it simply becomes an opportunity for the police to respond to complaints or to cite a person who's walking a dog unleashed in the presence of a police officer. We would not adopt an ordinance as such. We would simply have adopted this provision so it becomes part of the enforcement activities of the police
Does not
department.
apply to private land.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
As long as the dog is in your control. So for example, at my house, in my yard, my dog could be off leash.
Right.
If my dog left my property off leash, we have a violation.
So it would apply to all of our trails, all of our parks, all of our.
Sidewalks.
All of our town public property.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And Dartmouth College land?
It would ultimately, because Dartmouth College property is private,
So it's up to them.
it would be up to the college.
Yep.
Right.
Ma'am, Julian, what is the current state law enacted? So how does it differ from what this proposal is?
So the current state law does not require as a matter of course.
I don't know what that means.
So right now, Athos, if a community hasn't adopted RSA 466:30-A, or a city hasn't adopted a leash law, then police don't enforce leashing. The adoption of 466:30-A allows a community to say, now dogs must be leashed, but state statute doesn't require that currently. State statute makes it very clear what police departments or animal control officers or communities can do in response to complaints about dogs making noise, aggressive behavior, chasing wildlife, chasing domestic fowl, making themselves a nuisance, littering in other people's yards. Those sorts of things are all enforceable, but there's nothing in the statute per se that says leashing is enforceable unless a community has proactively adopted the limitation. So when we get a complaint at the police department about a dog running off leash, we don't have any enforcement capability. Now, if that dog bit somebody off leash, that's another story. But there's not a leashing requirement that we're enforcing right now because we haven't adopted this. And, you know, most cities, if they are going to enforce it, they adopt a more comprehensive dog ordinance, and it's got a leashing component in it. But the only way we can address the leash issue is if town meeting says we're heretofore adopting 466:30-A.
I did bring this up to the Conservation Commission to see how they felt about it relative to trails, and they were supportive. They all had experiences of, unhappy experiences with dogs off leash
On trails.
on trails, and so it was pretty much unanimous amongst that group that they thought this was appropriate. Please?
I brought with me this lovely photograph from, I think it was last fall, from the Hanover Conservancy in the town of Hanover. And I know the camera can't zoom in this far. I'll just describe it. It's a lovely autumnal scene of, I believe, a woman with a nice hat walking through a lovely meadow with no other people around, except I suppose a photographer is another person. Maybe he's in a distant shack somewhere. And a lovely golden retriever just walking through the field, not harming anyone, not doing anything. Although now that I look at it, potentially that golden retriever is about to attack the photographer. I can't quite tell. But by the looks of it, no. I think the whole intent of this photograph, and it's really quite lovely, was to remind us of our sense of place and our sense of time. What I mean by our sense of place is that we do live in an area where it seems like what this woman is enjoying with her golden retriever are readily available without infringing on anyone else's rights to enjoy the environment and the location by themselves, without being, I think a lot of the complaints I've been hearing are the dogs become a nuisance to people who don't want dogs approaching them, don't want dogs attacking them. And I know Joanna's been bit by a dog, which is rather horrible. But it also comes down to respect, and the people who don't want dogs jumping on them, biting on them, have as much right as this woman and her lovely golden retriever do to walk through fields unencumbered, unapproached. It seems to me that in a place where we live, that's a sense of place, there's room for everyone to enjoy this. And one thing with the current state the laws that we are currently working under, one thing we have never done is to try and educate dog owners as to what is responsible dog owning. And simple signage, for example, like we do at I happen to be on the board of Trescott Land with Peter, and we do not allow dogs up there for a variety of different reasons. One, we have a water area to protect, and two, there's a lot of wildlife that we don't want to have. It's bad if you bear up a tree with your dog, for example. But a signage such as control your dog, don't allow them to jump people, don't allow them to be a nuisance to other people, and if that necessitates leashing them, then so be it. We could have signs saying, it's a law when you're around people to create such an environment for the other people, for the non-dog companions, place that at trailheads. And what I worry about also with this ordinance is it's not enforceable by our understaffed police department. It wouldn't, and then even if we're up to staff, we're not going to assign an officer on each of our, I can't remember how many miles of trails we have, but that certainly isn't going to be the case. Therefore, it's going to come down to citizens enforcing it on other citizens, which frankly I find very scary. I think that sets us up for bullying. I don't know if I want to bring up this next thing that I'm talking about, but ever since Texas enacted, now I'm getting a little reactionary here, but the abortion law in Texas where local people can sue other people with regards to abortion. That's pushing things a little bit too far, and I retract that statement, but I think it's a little
Yeah, I
bit.
think it's a little far. I
It's a
think
little
you're
far.
like overstepping there. We're talking about a leash law for dogs so they don't jump on you.
Yeah, let me finish, Joanna. I do retract that statement, but I
Okay.
think bullying is a real concern. We're not going to have policemen there. We're going to have other people yelling at other people. I don't think that's appropriate when we haven't even tried the simplest technique, which is signage. And I will finish, a dog, being a dog companion is a responsibility, and let's enforce the public of its responsibility as opposed to adding useless, unenforceable laws.
Understood? Thank you.
And I do retract that statement, I apologize.
Thank
That was
you.
out of line.
Thank you.
And I
Thank
shouldn't
you.
have said that.
There's a piece of me that's with Athos on this. You'd hope that in this community, we could get responsible behavior with signage and with some education. But I guess the other part of that is clearly I don't know how many times a year there is an incident that is dangerous for people, but I guess it happens frequently enough that people respond positively to the thought of a leash law. I've watched on Blueberry Hill over the years, way back 20 years ago, nobody had their dog on a leash. Now almost everybody has their dog on a leash. And that's part of the culture there now, I guess. But yeah, there's a piece of me that agrees with Athos. It's a shame we have to put something like this in place. And you'd hope that responsible citizens would take care of it themselves.
And we haven't even let them. Most people don't know that there is
No problem?
a problem. Most dog owners don't know there's a problem. Most dog owners don't know that the state statute is what it is and dogs should be under control. I didn't know that.
Well,
Other comments?
I mean, my opinion is that I've had a number of people who have dogs, who have said that they've had unleashed dogs, a lot walking in the trails. They come running at them and people respond saying, oh, they're friendly. But even if you have your dog on a leash, a dog on a leash and a friendly dog don't necessarily go together. And so these people who actually have their dog on the leash, the dog is out of control and they don't appreciate the free dog approaching their dog. So, I mean, I think that this is an issue. There's a lot, I mean, we've actually seen a lot more activity on our trails in the past couple of years, a lot more conflict, I would say, with dogs. And, you know, Trescott's posted, but people let their dogs, for dogs, that you're supposed to have your dog on a leash at Trescott Company Lands, and,
No dogs.
but people bring their dogs.
No, dogs
So-
are allowed.
Dogs are allowed, but they're supposed to be on a leash.
Right, dogs are allowed, they're supposed to be.
They're allowed, but they're supposed to be on a leash. And people have told me that they're under control, so they don't need to be on a leash. And I just feel like I'm one voice, and, you know, I have strong feelings that we should have a leash law. But I think we should put it to the people and let people, our community, decide whether we have a leash law or not. And so I think we should have this discussion at town meeting, which is our democratic process, and see what people have to say, and let them vote. And if they say no, then we don't have it. If they say yes, then we support it.
Any comments from the public? This is a public hearing. Please step forward.
Hi, David Knopfel. I know you're all surprised to see me here for this. Just to a couple of your points, Athos, I mean, I think you and I disagree on the issue, but I have a lot of sympathy for what you said, for sure. I don't like extra rules and extra regulations, but I think the experiment that you're suggesting, I do think it has been tried. And I think my personal advocacy, and perhaps the advocacy of a lot of people on this particular issue, is not based on fear of what's going to happen. It's a response to things that are happening. I think one possible definition of bullying is when small children don't feel safe hiking on trails because they've been, and I mean this literally in the case of my family, run out of the woods by an off-leash dog and they don't want to go back. So, you know, as much sympathy as I have for your points, I do respectfully disagree. And I didn't even come here to say any of that. I actually just came here with a couple of questions because I think I very much support this, but I don't fully understand how it works yet because as I read RSA 46630, can only contain dogs under the following circumstances: running at large, off premises with another keeper, and not under control of any person. So does that simply mean that somebody can say, oh, no, my dog's under control, therefore I'm in compliance with this? And does that mean by simply asserting that one's dog is under control, it means they don't need to leave?
Only, David, if they're in a dog training, dog competition, dog
Hunting.
Right. Well,
herding-related function. It doesn't apply to somebody who wants to use as an excuse the notion that their dog's under their command because they respond to their voice recall. So it applies very specifically to certain types of dogs involved in certain types of activities, which makes sense when you think about the state we live in. It's a big hunting state, it's a field trial state, it's a herding and guarding state. People want to be sure to continue to allow that kind of activity unleashed. But the casual walking up to Balch Hill with your dog off leash would be a violation of a leash requirement in town if the town meeting adopted 466:30A.
Right. Now, I understand the herding and hunting exceptions and all that, but 466, whatever it's called, 30-A, nowhere in that wording does the word leash appear. So,
Yeah,
so by simply adopting it,
Yeah,
how do we have a leash ordinance by simply adopting it?
all I can tell you is this is what the town attorney has directed us to do, to have the leash requirement in place.
But 466 is not a leash requirement. The word leash is
Be-
nowhere in there.
No, because nowhere in the statute do you see this, it's the word leash. But in order to adopt a leash requirement, we need to acknowledge the legitimacy, we need to affirmatively adopt 466:30A.
Right, okay, so.
It's obtuse, but welcome to the state statutes. They're,
Do you then adopt a leash law?
then you simply adopt a two-sentence leash ordinance.
Okay, there's the answer.
Yeah, okay, that's my question.
Right.
So
Yep.
this is basically what we're talking about here.
Correct.
Step one.
It's
Correct.
an
And it is-
enabling.
It's
Right.
enabling, correct.
Yeah, and then so then to get to a leash ordinance, there's. a
Two
whole
sentences.
separate step.
Two sentences, that's it. It's a
Does that
simple.
happen at 2022 town meeting or not?
No, that happens by this select board.
I see. Got it.
So we need to be authorized by town meeting, so the select board can then adopt ordinance number 36, which will be the town leash law, or the town leash ordinance, which is simply 2 lines pertaining to 466:30-A.
Going back to my comment, I find this paragraph almost non-understandable. So, but you can understand if you say this is step one required by law to get us to a leash ordinance
Yeah.
if it passes.
Right, right.
So you know,
And all you,
When I read this paragraph, I said to myself, there's
What
a
is-
loophole in here that you could run a great thing through. I mean,
so I think as we present this, this verbiage just gets you nowhere.
no, so I will be doing a deciphered explanation in the background
I think it's a
information.
very simple explanation. This is required by law, by state law, to enable the
Select board
if they
to
so
adopt a
choose,
leash ordinance.
To adopt a leash ordinance that will read these 2 sentences.
Right.
thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the public, please?
Hi, I'm John Pepper, serving at school. I wasn't gonna say anything, but I can't help it, because we have 2 Goldens, and
No more off leash, John.
I don't want them. My wife's love, and my kids. But I do want to say one thing that I think is ironic, just to point it out. We live off of, we overlook Mink Brook, so we see the Mink Brook Trail. And there are quite a few days a year where you wake up startled by the gunshots coming out of Mink Brook. And so it feels ironic to me that you would be able to have a dog off leash as long as you're carrying a rifle with you. I just think that's like a really strange message to send. I don't know if you've heard the gunshots on Mink Brook, but there is no way they aren't within distance of hitting our house or people walking on the trail. And we called it in, and of course there's nothing that can be done. And I think it's just an irony that needs to be pointed out. I can't believe that we won't let dogs do what dogs do, but we'll let hunters be sitting right down there on Mink Brook with people running and doing whatever they do. That just seems like,
Welcome to New Hampshire.
well, I understand, but.
I mean, the hunting
New
is
Hampshire
sacred.
could let dogs be free too.
Well, and that's why they make it so challenging for a community to enact a leash requirement. Cities, no, they can do whatever they want to, but we have to have town meeting authorization, John. But
Right.
hunters are protected, and if they're using a dog, most of what you're hearing are duck hunters hunting waterfowl in the Mink Brook estuary there. And typically, they do have dogs with them retrieving the ducks from the water body after they've shot them, and those dogs are not on leash, so that dog's legit unleashed.
And it's great to be speaking at a select board meeting again. I have a little PTSD from my Norwich days, but thank you.
Please.
My name's Jared Burke. I have an interest in, so just to qualify, yes, most likely duck hunting. The range of a shotgun is not that far, so you don't have much to worry about. Only maybe not even 100 yards. So just let you know. So you feel safe. I'm a hunter. I hunt in these one, I agree, John, I think we should bring this to town meeting. I think there's a lot of people that do enjoy having their dogs off leash, and many of those people, I would venture to say, most of those people are responsible dog owners and have their dog under control. And I think it's, one of the reasons why people enjoy living in a place like this, because we have public land. I'm a public landowner, as everyone else is. And those, echoing your point there, being able to utilize the public lands and enjoy it with a dog that does not run up to people and does not scare people or jump on people or interact with a dog that doesn't want to be interacted with. There are many, many responsible dog owners that follow those rules and again, enjoy that recreation and this would certainly take it away. I would recommend that if we're going to enact something like this, that we add something that talks about electronic collars, because they're a very effective way of training a dog very humanely and keeping control of your dog. And that's not on there. An electronic collar, it'll reach, some of them will reach a half a mile and are, again, extremely effective at extremely effective at controlling your dog and keeping your dog close to you, etc.
I should mention while you're sitting here, Jared, that the governor did sign a bill that allows people to have their dogs in outdoor seating areas of restaurants. They will need to be leashed if town meeting authorizes us to adopt leash law. But they're now allowed to be in outdoor seating areas of restaurants with some rules. For example, staff isn't allowed to pet the dog and go back to their food service. So there are some rules, but that's not anything we can prevent in Hanover through ordinance. That's now enabled by a state law that the governor signed.
Right,
into
right.
effect.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. It's that there. Previous to this, it put put restaurant owners in a really tough spot.
Right.
Because, and this has more to do with the American Disabilities Act and the FDA Food Code. Essentially, the FDA Food Code, this is just education for anybody who's interested. I guess you all are because I have the four. But the FDA Food Code prevents dogs from being on the premise, which is kind of a ill-defined term.
Right.
But so there were many people that would bring their dog to eat outside thinking that it was perfectly legal. Most of the time, if we asked them to leave, first of all, they would get pretty angry. But the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, presents you with challenge questions for you to ask the customer. There are 2 questions that you could ask. They're very specific and they're very vague. So you can ask, is it a service dog? And is the dog trained to perform a service? I can't remember exactly how it's worded. And if the person answers yes to both, then there's nothing that the restaurant owner can do. And so we have some people in town that like to give restaurant people, cashiers, 16-year-old kids a really hard time about this. And I'm glad that we're getting this picked up because, again, it puts restaurant people in a really tough spot.
And it was an issue I dealt with frequently over the last 2 summers, as did Rob Hausman, because of all the outdoor dining that we did. And I think in response to the extreme increase in outdoor dining that occurred during COVID, the governor decided, look, let's make this clear. Dogs can be in outdoor seating areas of restaurants as long as they're under the control of their owner, in our case, leashed, and if this passes, and that restaurant staff doesn't pet the dog, touch the dog while they're also in the food serving and order taking business. So.
And that's also in the food code. I was glad to see it because a lot of people love taking their dog.
Yeah, it was just a constant source of stress for restaurant owners and for patrons who are concerned about dogs in outdoor dining areas. And so now the governor's made it clear they're allowed. They'll just need to be leashed if we agree to the adoption of the specific statute at town meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Which does bring up the question, getting back to how does one define leash? I think the question, emerging technology of electronic control is not approached in this archaic
No, the statute's so,
so, you know,
Um,
that is vague and inappropriate if we leave it as we stand, as is proposed.
in terms of a physical leash, Athos.
Yeah.
Well, we can
We'll cross
define
bridge
that,
when we come to it.
yeah,
Yes, I-
we could
I-
define
I
that in the
said as
second go
proposed.
around.
That, I
Right.
didn't say it was needed to be discussed right now.
No, I think it's a good point though.
Good point.
Yeah.
Please.
There are examples of, at least one town that does actually define what a leash is. So that precedent already exists in at least one town. Also, Julia, it's my understanding that the SB 17, which allows dogs in outdoor dining areas, they do have a carve-out that will allow municipalities to enact their own ordinance saying it's actually prevented in this town, as far as I know. I realize that's not on the table for discussion right now.
Right.
And I have a ton of sympathy for the point that Jared expressed about the ADA protections, which are proper, and people who may attempt to abuse those protections. But I want it to be clear that as many people as there are who want to bring their dogs into restaurants, there are people who don't feel the same way. The FDA food code is unequivocal, and that's not based on somebody's preference. That's based on, you know, the FDA's reasoning, mostly related to sanitation and allergies and things like that. So I don't think, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's true that the town can or couldn't do anything about.
My understanding is that cities can, David, but the towns cannot. But this is a newly signed law, so it's still subject to legal interpretation in the courts. I simply wanted to raise it here because I know of the issues we've dealt with over the last couple of summers with dogs in outdoor restaurant dining areas in towns. And I didn't want the public to be confused because as many questions, I got far more questions and complaints about dogs in restaurant dining areas than I got regarding unleashed dogs.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I
That's
just
my
wanna be
point,
clear.
that a large number of people are not on board with it.
No, the complaints were from people who were angry they couldn't bring their dog to sit in a restaurant outdoor dining area.
So, but, and that will be nice to talk about when we get to
Right,
Parklets, but
right.
we've got like a
Just
ton
wanna
of
raise
other
it.
stuff
Here we
to
go.
do,
So,
so.
Can I show a photograph of Julia and me eating dinner with a dog right next to us? Indoors, in a restaurant.
Well, it
course,
is
it
very
wasn't- it
common
was-
in many countries.
It was in France.
Yeah.
It was a lovely lunch.
It
we
was a
had.
lovely restaurant in Shawnee, yes.
Yeah,
Okay, so, and again, Julia, this needs to be voted on at the business meeting,
Yes,
so.
by paper
By
ballot.
paper ballot. Okay. Bill, you have any?
No, I would recommend that we put it on the warrant and let
Is
the
that a
public
motion?
decide.
Is that a motion?
Yes, I so move.
I'll second that motion.
All those in
So
favor?
again, we just need to be clear to the public that you have to be in the room that
vote on
night,
it.
and you're gonna have to complete a paper ballot, and the outcome will then decide what the select board does after that, in our wording.
Right.
Okay. My position is I'm prepared to put it in front of the public, but I'm not particularly fond of it as a person, so that's,
You have a right to vote.
I have the right to vote on public, on my, trying my voting day.
Right.
So, let's have a, all those in favor?
Aye,
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Thank you. Thank you, Athos, for speaking
thank
up.
you. Yep.
So,
Actually kind of refreshing that we didn't all agree on something.
so that closes that public hearing. I will close that public hearing. So, I'm gonna open a public hearing to consider adoption of the proposed Parklets ordinance regulating outdoor dining in downtown parking spaces.
Rob, come on up.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty, I just want to say that I read through this and I actually understood it. So congratulations for those of you who drafted it. It was like clear, concise. I understood what you were talking about. It wasn't like what we just reviewed.
I read the whole
Thank
thing,
you.
and I think you really need a select board liaison to become part of the town Parklet Review Committee. I mean, that could be right up there with the fence sitters. Anyway, I'll be quiet. So Rob, what's actually going on here?
So for the last 2 years, the town, as you are aware, first Rob Hudson, Director of Planning for the town of Hanover, thank you for hearing this tonight. We're a little bit behind the 8 ball, knowing that warm weather is coming and there's some challenges getting this to you in a timely fashion. That said, the governor's emergency order has lapsed, which gives us real flexibility in providing for formal outdoor dining that would be permittable by the state food licensing and alcohol licensing piece without some designated formal area that could be contained in addition to other types of outdoor seatings. So this ordinance is proposed to allow for up to 16 parking spaces in a parking zone area that's shown in the map. No more than 4 per restaurant or business that would apply to that. For a period from May 1st to October 31st, unless granted earlier rights by the Public Works Director with certain conditions. 1, the platform has to be ADA compliant. 2, the platform cannot interfere with stormwater and maintenance of the public facilities. 3, that it be built to a certain safety standard, including building code standards for railings. And 4, that it be protected both prior to and after the site with protection devices. Prior to the restaurant facility or seating area would require a 1,000-pound water-filled jersey barrier. The town would provide. After the parklet, it would be a curb stop that the town would provide. With that in mind, we think that this ordinance reflects the public embrace of outdoor seating. It provides some minimal revenue offset for the use of those parking spaces and sets a standard that would allow for reasonable investment by the proposed sponsors of the parklet to ensure that they could use it for up to 3 years in any one permitting cycle. Happy to address any questions.
Part of our goal here, we feel keenly the competition from the city of Lebanon. And I have to tell you, their outdoor dining areas are a whole lot spiffier than ours are with our Jersey barriers. And it was pretty clear to Rob, and I certainly agreed that by upgrading the requirements a little bit, but also ensuring that restaurant owners could utilize those parking spaces for more than one season, because they would be doing some of the upgrade investments, that we could make this outdoor dining look better and make it as pleasant as possible for diners. Get them off the pavement, up on a raised surface, even with the sidewalk edge, and give us all an opportunity to dress up downtown a little bit so that it looks somewhat less industrial and low-key as it has the last 2 summers.
I should point out that the basis of this ordinance is from the National Association of Transportation, NACDO. It's formally adopted throughout the country. We use Burlington, Vermont, Montpelier, Vermont, Portland, Maine, and Derry, New Hampshire as our models because of the cold weather climate issues that we deal with and the way they approach their ordinances. But this ordinance is built on a national standard.
Just, the sidewalk dining, that's not an issue? I mean, that's okay on the current regulations?
The town of Hanover allows for outdoor sidewalk dining with planning board approval.
Okay, thanks. And I read about the flush with the curb, which I think makes total sense. So then I want to prove to you that I actually read this whole thing. So if you go under number 5, Roman numeral 6, there's a blank line there, which you should correct that typo. That's what.
Did Kari look at this too?
I would also point out that Public Works and Parklet and police have the opportunity.
So it's total incompetence. not just your department.
Okay.
All right, thank you for the clarification.
Any questions or comments from the public? This being a public hearing. Please.
Jared Burke again, 8 Dresden and 30 South Main Street at Lou's Restaurant. So I want to voice my strong support of this ordinance. It's really going to improve outdoor dining from what we've seen in the last few years and just and improve the town. So it won't look like a Bedouin city as we go Main Street towards the college. The only concern that I have about this is the investment is significant for the restaurant owners. In the past, we rented equipment, and this year we actually purchased our tables and chairs, but we're also going to be investing in this deck, which, given the condition of the street, is not an easy thing to do. It's not just a couple of sleepers and some wood on top. In order for this to meet the standard here of being a half-inch from the curb, up and down from the curb, and then being level on a street that is far from level with frost eaves and drainage and stuff like that, it's actually very
Challenging.
complex. Yeah. So my rough estimate is somewhere between 10 and 20,000 just for the deck alone. And I know that we are planning on redoing South Main Street and potentially making the street flat with no raised curb. So the question would be, if that is going to happen in the next year or two, I'd rather not spend $20,000 on a deck that is going to just end up in the trash.
So, my sense, Jared, is, I mean, I'm a short timer, so, but,
She says with glee.
the soonest the town could do that project, if we're spending taxpayer dollars, would be summer of 2024. Because we don't have the money appropriated in the proposed budget for this summer through next June 30. If we're able to get it approved at town meeting a year from now as taxpayer funded, it's unlikely that the crews could do it until summer of 24, not summer of 23. So you'd at least get 2 outdoor dining seasons out of your deck. The only issue that I would raise is that it's a possibility we'll be able to apply for federal monies for the sidewalk reconstruction. Not because of the dining piece, but just because we have the plan to redo the sidewalk, so that could mean the money would come sooner than that, but we won't have to expend that money in any one-year time frame if we get federal funds, which is to say, I think you can count on at least 2 seasons, is my off-the-cuff thought.
How important is it that we avoid a curb? How important, I mean, we lived all for 2 years.
It's an ADA issue, Peter. Rob, you can answer this.
It feels like this is like Hanover Improvement Society Good Works grant opportunities, Mascoma Bank Good Works grant, I mean.
For the deck, to build the decks?
Yeah, it's beautifying the downtown. I mean, can we think creatively, you know, see if they'd
Yeah.
split the costs, have all of you restaurateurs go to HIS? I mean, nothing like me sending people their way, but I mean, it is making our town a much more lively, vibrant place.
It's worth a conversation with Jeff Graham to see if there's some
And
matching funds
Mascoma
that
Bank
we can-
has, you know, community funds. I mean,
Well, but they
I
have
don't know.
they have a very specific grant seeking
Yeah.
cycle, Joanna, with a deadline that isn't until, I think it's the end of September, so
Yeah,
it probably
anyway.
wouldn't help for this season.
Just
but-
a-
Can't get
just an
around the
idea.
ADA with a ramp.
I mean, Rob, you know this half-inch requirement.
So the challenge is how you would anchor the structure, the required railings and supports to the,
It'll also look way, way better.
the challenge is how you anchor the railings and support to the pavement if you're not building a deck. There is a building code requirement to have a railing that can support up to 200 pounds of pressure. That's a structural requirement from the code. And the other issue is, as Jared can attest to, a rain event makes the seating on pavement very challenging.
Flooded.
You know,
I have this image of something floating in out to the street, because the vent being a floating object.
No.
Okay,
Thank you.
please.
Hello,
Hello.
I'm Nigel Murphy's in Pasto. As Jared has said, we're all about revenue, just like the town is. So it's a good thing. It's been great the last 2 seasons. It is a major expense. Jared and I were on the same contract just to look at it. And it is about 15, 20K. Plus we have to store it in the winter. I mean, it's not just an ending amount of money, and it's an engineering feat just to be able to make it level and safe. So we're all for it. I think one of the things that we're running up against here is time, is that it hasn't been approved yet, and lining up contractors with finality for approval is really hard these days because of their, overburdened work, etc. So it's now March, basically it's April, we're a month away. So I'd say, if we're gonna do this, I really appreciate Rob Hausman's push on this. He's been a great advocate of the town and making it look more enjoyable, a la Burlington, Portsmouth, whatever. And I think it's a great thing for Hanover. So time would be something that is a big concern here.
Well, hopefully we'll act on it tonight.
Yeah, the intention is to have the board adopt it tonight, Nigel, if they're comfortable with it.
See, I knew I could push that.
Well done.
I appreciate it, but we'll build, I think the rest of it is we'll build them right, they'll build them safe, and it's gonna look a little bit like Europe. I think it's gonna be pretty cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Further public comment? John?
Again, I want to talk about the dogs again. I will tell you, I did a poll, and I've already had 140 votes. It's 134 votes mandating leashes to 19.
You're polling already.
I did.
Voting for what, please?
Leashes.
Mandating
He's,
This has nothing to do with restaurants. But,
Just did a quick poll on Twitter.
thank you for,
Yes, John?
So I just want to say, first of all, thank you for all the efforts you guys have made to try to support the restaurants over the last 2 years. It's made a huge difference, even when something hasn't quite, struck gold. It's been really, just the effort matters in iterating, so that's great. I will say, we have an advantage that we have this patio all the time, right? That's not out in the street. One of the things that I do wish is that people would feel comfortable using that patio, even if they're not eating our food. And so last year when we were able to put the street side, we also encouraged people, like, we may only have hours, 11 to 8 p.m., but you're free to use this at any time. And sometimes I think that would be really strong for the community to just sort of make sure it feels very open for any food. Because takeout sometimes, one place is full and others aren't. It feels ridiculous to see full seats and then right down the street it's empty and people don't feel comfortable. So just something to put out there. But I do like the idea of going to HIS or whoever. Your idea, Joanna.
Jeff might not like it. But we serve on the board, and they have a good works policy. This is good works for the town, so,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more discussion for it? I think we're all going the same way here. So I move that we adopt the Parklets ordinance regulation. Parklets.
Second.
All those in favor? Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approved.
Rob, I think that we worked with a Dartmouth student. Was she a student? Remember when we did the first Parklet up at the Hanover Inn and it poured rain? This is what, 4 years ago?
Yes.
And we brought in fake grass and stuff. We should get in touch with her because this is a moment.
That was Ellen, wasn't it? Ellen.
Ellen, right?
I think it was Ella.
Ella.
Ella's someone.
Ella, she was
Engineering student.
engineering student. Remember?
Yeah. So we should just
we like
update her.
stole Hanover Inn, well, we
Right.
borrowed Hanover Inn tables and
We should update her and let her know what she
what she
started.
started. That's kind of cool.
Okay. Thank you all. You're probably gonna bail on us now. But we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep
Thank
going.
you for being here.
I move that we set a pre-town meeting, public hearing, to consider the proposed warrant for the 2022 town meeting for Monday, April 4th.
I'll second that.
Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
I move that we adopt the proposed union contract for FY 22-23 with the AFSCME Local 1348 Public Works employees.
I'll second that.
Julie, you want to bring us up to date? Carl,
Yep,
Julie, why don't you bring us up to date?
yep, so we have a tentative agreement approved with AFSCME, Public Works employees. We have two AFSCME bargaining unit. One covers our police officers and dispatchers, the other covers our Public Works employees. This is the Public Works Local 1348 agreeing to the 3% COLA, which is what we budgeted for. A one-year contract only, not a two-year contract. They're also all eligible for the step increases, but this is based on the guidance from the select board. So town staff is recommending that we approve that agreement. We're still negotiating with AFSCME Police and with the IAFF. It's not clear yet that we're going to reach agreement with those two bargaining units. Excuse
So
me.
Kari Asmus, as actually chair of the finance committee, we took a position on the school-related negotiated agreements in January, and so there's a good chance, I think, that members may also want to
Take a position.
take advantage of the opportunity actually to weigh in. But I was wondering if there was any more of a summary. Was there any change to any other cost items, whether it's, health insurance, co-pays, a bonus, any other cost items whatsoever?
The only thing we agreed to, Kari, in light of the challenges of obtaining CDLs going forward in the future,
Which are what?
commercial driver's licenses, and wanting to retain those individuals who actually pursue and obtain a CDL, as an annual bonus of $250 for retained CDLs. So a motivation to renew those CDLs and to hire individuals with commercial driver's licenses.
But that would be covered under the operating budget
Correct.
currently?
That-
So there's no budget impact?
Correct.
Well,
Yeah,
Was it
Well-
correct?
because
There's
we
no contract impact, right?
No, I'm trying to clarify.
No,
There was,
that's covered under the budget,
Right.
in the proposed
Proposed
budget.
budget.
Right, that's what Bill was
Yeah.
saying, yeah.
Okay.
right.
Do we have an idea of how many individuals that would affect?
That's about 75% of the members of the bargaining unit. I can get the exact number, but it's everybody who drives a highway vehicle.
I don't know how many employees.
30.
There are 32 members in the union, so roughly 25.
Yeah,
Mhm.
times 250.
Right,
Okay,
right.
that would be the maximum. Thank you.
Correct, yep.
Any more discussion? It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It is adopted.
And by the way, the deadline for approving the other two contracts, if this comes to pass, will be at your next meeting, at the pre-town meeting public hearing. So that's the last opportunity.
So I move that we accept the administrative corrections to the New Hampshire Alpha Association of Sigma Alpha Epsilon.
Epsilon.
This was a relatively small one, wasn't it?
Yes, it was
Yeah.
very small, yep.
I'll second it.
This is an administrative correction, and it's a relatively small number. Any further discussion?
No.
Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Give an appointment to Sustainable Hanover.
Right. Judy Kala, who has served on Sustainable Hanover, is seeking appointment to an additional 3-year term.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Wonderful, continued person on that committee. We have a banner request we accept the Dartmouth Innovation and Technology Festival banner request. Do I there a second?
Oh,
Bill second.
did you move it?
I did, you wanna move it? You move it. You got it.
Did you move it?
Yes, I did move it.
Well, then I'll second it.
Okay.
And we can't accommodate this request.
I guess we should have asked them.
Yeah.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The minutes,
They are pretty vague.
yeah, the one that I am concerned about, Julia, and I think they have to be redone, is the final one of March 2nd.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't specifically, I mean, I
Reference.
started out that meeting with 4 or 5 specific things, and they were eventually adopted, but
Yep.
they're not mentioned here specifically at all.
And one of the challenges that our minutes taker had with all 3 meetings is that the sound quality was really pretty poor.
So I could,
So I think what we'll have to do is have,
let me try to dig those out, I mean, they're in my notes.
if you can find them, Peter, that'd be great,
I will do
but
that.
I can also ask Carrie to see if she can re-listen to the YouTube video of that meeting to see if we can capture them.
I can, I meant to do that today, but I didn't get into it.
Okay,
So I'm going to move the adoption of the February 28th and
March 1st,
the March 1st, but wait on the 2nd.
okay,
I'll
gotcha.
second those motions.
Any discussion on February 28th and March 1? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay.
They're adopted, and we'll work out, try to get to that tomorrow, Julie.
Thank you, that'd be great.
Administrative report.
So we're busily preparing the town report for town meeting and the warrant. It's going to be a busy town meeting this year. We have 10 zoning ordinance amendments, 6 supported and proposed by the planning board, and 4 that came in by petition. So lots of background information preparation will be required as part of preparing for the town report. For town meeting, we now have our standard budget warrant articles and the leash question. I do believe we're getting another one by petition. It's coming from Dartmouth students. I have no idea what it consists of. They were under the assumption they had to come sell it to you at your next meeting, but that's not required. All they need to do is submit it with the requisite 25 signatures of registered voters. So if that doesn't come in until Tuesday, the 5th, we'll have to meet again sometime that week to be posted, because you have to vote to take a position on that.
Do we know what it's about?
No idea. No idea. So that's, all I know is that the students have asked if they could get on your agenda, if they needed to get on your agenda to present their petition warrant article to you, and we said no, that the board doesn't have any ability to accept or reject that. It's required to include it by law. You just need 25 signatures of registered voters. So don't know when that will come in.
But did you encourage
there a
them to
deadline?
get it in
We
before our
did.
next meeting, so
We
we
did.
don't have to have an extra meeting?
We did.
Okay, good.
In addition, for filing for positions begins Wednesday of this week, the 23rd, and extends through a week from Friday, April 1st at 5 p.m. Positions that we currently have open include 1 select board position, town moderator, town clerk, trustee of trust funds, and supervisors of the checklist, and at the library trustee. So I'm busily pursuing those individuals who are currently serving in those positions to determine if they in fact intend to file to run again, so that I can kind of keep the warrant updated. So filing opens on Wednesday, the 23rd, and closes on Friday, April 1st. And then you'll have your pre-town meeting public hearing on the 4th. We'll finalize the warrant and related documents and get it off to the printer at the end of that first week in April. So on April 8th. And then head into town meeting. I am praying that the Omicron 2A variant, subvariant, doesn't emerge in Hanover, because the worst case scenario is that we would have to consider once again postponing town meeting, which is currently planned for Tuesday, May 10th in the high school gymnasium. So everybody say a prayer, light some candles,
Do a dance, whatever it takes.
whatever you have to do to keep Omicron subvariant 2A away from the Upper Valley so that it doesn't impact our town meeting. We have begun to meet with our group of volunteers, our town clerk Betsy McLean, who has informed me she is not running again for town clerk, which means we've got to find a new town clerk to run for election, and we think we've got that person, but we're not 100% certain yet. So we're actively planning logistically for it to happen as it used to happen in days of yore, indoors in the high school gymnasium, but we also will need to have a plan B in our back pocket just in case, and it's not as if we haven't already implemented that 2 years running, so keep your fingers crossed that we don't need to pull that rabbit out of a hat again this year. And other than that, I'm busily following several pieces of legislation, all of which are problematic for the town of Hanover, that have made it out of the House and are heading this week is crossover week, so everything gets voted on and then heads over to the Senate, or voted on in the Senate and heads over to the House. Lots of wild bills out there, folks, that are intended to make our life interesting, that communities like Hanover and the Municipal Association are battling, but I'm not particularly optimistic. So, strange legislative session.
When can we join Vermont?
Yeah.
Well, what about was it Croydon?
Yeah.
Oh
Croydon.
my God.
I mean, that's what happens when folks don't turn out to a school meeting. It gets hijacked. And that situation is really serious because the money that was appropriated isn't even enough to pay their tuition bill to the Newport School District for all the children they send to Newport. So not only does that impact Croydon's budget, but it impacts the city of Newport school budget, which has already been adopted. So it's a serious problem that's going to require petitioning the court for a special town meeting, an emergency town
They'll
meeting.
have to do, that's what I thought they would do.
Yeah.
And the, okay,
And the
Yep,
cost
and that's it for
associated.
administrative reports.
Selectboard reports. No,
Nothing to report.
others. Julie, just want to make it understand, we didn't schedule anything for April 25th, did we? Tonight,
No, our, hold on, Peter. Our meeting in April is the Monday prior.
Right.
Yeah, nothing on the 25th.
Okay, that's what you want. I have nothing to report.
The Advisory Board of Assessors met this afternoon for a couple hours to review abatement requests, and reviewed about 21
Yeah,
cases.
20, yeah.
20, and so that will be coming to the select board, the decisions. There's some additional work that needed to be done, but for the most part, we made decisions.
They acted on 15 of the 20.
Yep,
Homework on the balance.
on the balance, so, in pretty good shape.
Yep.
Looks like there's a
No, it's
question
just-
out there.
Hold, just hold. Next topic? Other business?
Did I miss it?
No?
No,
It's next topic.
Okay, finish Selectboard reports.
that's
Other
finished.
business?
Okay, so I have
Well-
other business. I didn't think it was appropriate to make a report on it because this is a request. That's why I thought it was other business. So at the last Hanover Finance Committee meeting, which was a week ago Monday, we got into a discussion on tax exemptions for the elderly in particular. And that is statewide, that towns are allowed to do that. And it's based on age, income, assets, et cetera. And there's a sliding scale of 65 to 70 and above. The town hasn't modified ours for 14 years. And with the recent assessment, which we know has jumped some people's real estate quite a bit, Finance Committee thought it would be appropriate to ask the Select Board to look at this and see if there's any opportunity to change things. So since last Monday, I spoke to Julia to just clarify, kind of what does it entail and all the details. And besides exemptions, potential elderly exemptions under state law, there's others for disabled individuals, blind, and then veterans. So each one of those is a different potential tax exemption. Overall, under the current situation, there's very few people who take advantage, especially of the elderly exemption. So it's not necessarily a budget issue, impact on the revenue, but it's something that probably we should consider. So what my recommendation is that Julia and we need a legal review. They didn't have time this past week to get to it. So I'd recommend that we put it on the agenda for our next meeting, which is April 4, to have a discussion. And then we'll have our data, we'll have the information. But again, just as a highlight, if our understanding, and this is what we have to clarify, it would be a warrant article, it would be at night, and it might require a paper ballot for each one individually. So we need to clarify all those procedural issues so we understand what we're getting ourselves into, and then we'll talk about what the potential impact could be, which I think is minor. But I think it's a process that could be a little tedious, but valuable to consider.
And if you would choose to move forward to modify those exemptions, you would also need to set them down for a public hearing at your second meeting in April, which has been our standard practice in Hanover, that we've held a public hearing prior to town meeting authorization of these changes. Even if you take it up as a discussion item at your pre-town meeting public hearing, town attorney says based on previous court decisions, we should also subject it to an additional public hearing at your second meeting in April. Each of the exemptions, they would need to be separate public hearings.
So that would be April 18th.
Good. Please.
Hi, Kimberly Hartman again, school board member. I actually have a little bit, if you don't mind, a kind of a little public service announcement about a meeting that's happening that I think the town of Hanover might be interested in. On this Thursday, March 24th, there's a Norwich special meeting / community forum that's going to be talking about the Vermont waiting study. And I know we're in New Hampshire, not Vermont, but they are our partner in Dresden. And there is currently Vermont state legislation going on that seems to be progressing rather quickly, that, long story short, may increase Norwich's property taxes up to 30% for their education property.
Piece, for the education piece?
Educational property taxes. But of course, they're our partner in Dresden. And so I just want to make sure that Hanover residents are also up to speed with what this legislation could do to Dresden. And again, so this is this Thursday, March 24th. There's a Zoom option, but it's also being held at Marion Cross School in Norwich at 6 p.m. As also a member of the Hanover Finance Committee, we're going to be having a kind of a special meeting at the next future Hanover Finance Committee meeting, as well as the Dresden School Board will be kind of understanding this issue more, determining timeline, next steps, and that kind of thing. But I just want to let you know that the Norwich School Board members will be hosting a community forum, public Q&A this Thursday at 6 p.m.
Great.
This Thursday is the,
Yes.
It's called the waiting option,
Waiting, like,
as in weight of water?
As in, yes, like, so what it is, and just to kind of give you a quick sense, why it's weighting, it's assigning a financial weight based upon a pupil. So certain, if you're from a rural area or urban area, it's a little bit different than how New Hampshire does it, right? It's more state
Right,
controlled.
centric,
and then
yep.
Centered, and then finances are allocated down back to the school districts, but kind of centrally located. And they do the allocation based upon certain characteristics of pupils, so one of which of many allocation methods, but that's one that they're looking at. And they're determining to see if that there's a task force that was assigned to work on this. And it was, I have to admit, I'm also going to get educated on Thursday as well, but I just want to let you know that essentially that they're kind of changing the financial weights that kind of are not in the favorable of a Norwich student population direction. So essentially Norwich be footing more of the bill.
They get less state funds, fewer state funds allocated to Norwich pupils.
Exactly. So we will be learning more
Wow.
about that on Thursday, and I hope to see those who are interested then. And also, it's very important to have Hanover's vote in Dresden, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. I have one more public service announcement.
Please.
Because our fellow select board member's not here, and as a planning board rep and as Nancy, I just thought I would take this time to invite everyone and anyone to the Hanover Sustainability Master Plan Public Forum on April 2nd from 10 to 12. It's a virtual meeting. There's this really cool, you can be an avatar and go to the town meeting, go to the website and let your voice be heard in various rooms on this pretty cool website that our consulting team has put together. And you can get to that link from HanoverNewHampshireMasterPlan.com. And but the actual live commentary happens between 10 and 12 on April 2nd, which is a Saturday morning.
Virtual, the first time we're doing this.
Big virtual meeting,
virtually.
and I think we're all hoping that we'll even have more people than we normally do.
Right. Right.
So,
Lot of
and
creative
everyone's
work.
welcome, lots of outreach has
postcard
been
out
done,
that day.
postcards.
Yeah.
Yes, postcards went out to everybody at a tremendous
Students are
amount.
students come back on Saturday and Sunday for start of spring term classes on Monday, so they'll have a postcard invitation in their Hinman box when they get back. So I think staff and the consulting team has done, and the advisory committee's done
Great.
tried to get the word out, so
Right.
hopefully everyone can participate. Thanks.
Okay. Any other business? Hearing none, there has been a request for a non-public session. Discuss items pursuant to RSA 91A32A, C, and E.
Bill Garrity, yes. Happy Johnson's, yes.
Peter Christie, yes.
Joanna Whitcomb, yes.
We are in non-public session.